I will be the first to confess that I have a particular and perhaps unusual attraction to the deep, the dark, the mysterious, the outright strange aspects that can sometimes lurk in the shadows of seemingly innocent trends in pop culture, whether they be viral sensations or cultures or communities or basically anything along those lines. I find that more often than not, there is something strange behind that innocent facade, and I think it's important to bring those things to light. And Pokemon is no exception. Even though from its very inception in the 90s, it has altered the very fabric, the very landscape of childhood. Most of you guys watching, if not all of you watching, have in some way been influenced by Pokemon, even if you're unaware of it. Even if you've never indulged in Pokemon related activities, it has influenced your life just by existing. That's how powerful of a force we are talking about here. But even though it has a rather squeaky clean record, there are still a few tragic pitfalls that are worthy of discussing and bringing to light, and that's what this video is about. There are deaths involved with Pokemon. Now, I'm not claiming at all that Pokemon is directly responsible for these, but they are a factor in the deaths that will be discussed here, and we're not going to be talking about every single Pokemon associated death, just a few of them. The main ones, as you'll notice, and you're probably most aware of, are the Pokemon Go related ones. But when Pokemon Go was released, it became wildly popular, but Pokemon failed to make it as secure and safe as possible. They were negligent with safety concerns, and as y'all most likely know, there were, traffic accidents and things like that from people driving on their phones. And I won't necessarily be focusing on those ones, but those are a big concern that Pokemon just failed to address before they released the game. Before I get started talking about those things, I want to bring your attention to an interesting website. I don't know if interesting's the right word, but I came across a website that I did end up using in my research. It's called the Pokemon Go Death Tracker. The most recent death on it is from 2022. And so I don't know if the website is fully updated or if there just haven't been any more deaths since 2022. But it also includes injuries, and at the bottom it has honorable mentions that fail to meet, either category, but are just worth mentioning. Check it out for yourself. It will be linked in the description below if you would like to check it out for yourself. And while you're down there, you should consider liking and subbing because it does support me a great deal, and I would absolutely appreciate it. Now, that being said, let's get started. The first death that I'd like to discuss is Gerson Lopez de Leon. I apologize greatly if I butchered the name, but the reason I would like to talk about this one is not just because it's a tragic death, but because the media handled this death so disrespectfully and immaturely that I believe it's appropriate to at least shed some light on the actual truth of the situation. Now, of course, this is not all news outlets, but just particular ones that thought it would make a great story to bend the truth of how this death actually happened. So the initial story that seemed to flood the media in response to this death is that Lopez and his friend Daniel Picken tried to break into a house to capture a Pokemon on Pokemon Go. This is wildly false, and this disreputable newspaper tried to bend the truth in such a way as to make the victim of this heinous crime seem at fault. Because if you break into someone's home and you get shot at from self-defense, then obviously there's some level of justification there. And in this way, by bending the truth like this, you are blaming someone who has died and who actually isn't at fault for any of their actions. And that is just downright rude and disrespectful, to say the least. I'm sure the families really hated seeing how this story was out there. I mean, it baffles me that a disreputable news outlet could do this. The first indication of this newspaper not being super legitimate is that it keeps referencing the Pokemon as animals, and most reliable resources will at least say pocket monsters or even critters. That is acceptable. But animals, I feel like, is not, and is just a poorly researched article. So let me tell you the actual story of what happened to Harrison Lopez de Leon. Actually, before I do that, I did want to mention that the Sun article on this, the title says, Pokemon Go Death. Teen shot dead and another seriously injured after breaking into house to catch virtual animals. So they're just repeating the title of the original article that started this hoax for whatever reason. But then in the actual article, it doesn't even mention he broke into the house to catch virtual animals. It actually has the totally accurate story of what actually happened. So I'm confused on why the title is what it is. It actually confuses me. I'm going to leave a link down below so you guys can check out exactly what I'm talking about. It has the true story of what happened that doesn't involve breaking into a house, but the title, it's almost as if it's clickbait. It's basically clickbait. So again, another terrible act that a disreputable newspaper is using. So, as promised, here is the true story of what happened to Lopez de Leon here. It is true that he was out with his friend Daniel. They were both at this scene, but there is no breaking into a house. Instead, they were just meandering along an old railroad hunting these Pokemon on Pokemon Go when a van came out of nowhere and shot at them several times. There were almost 20 bullet casings found at the scene. Lopez was the only one who succumbed to the gunfire. Daniel, on the other hand, did thankfully survive, though he was terribly injured after this. As far as I'm concerned, they never caught who was driving the van and who shot at them, which is probably the most unfortunate part of this case. There's no justice there at all. And even worse, the media decided to twist the truth of this for whatever reason, just to gain clout. I mean, I don't think news articles should be searching for clout that much, honestly. But that's the true story. This was a completely random and egregious attack on these two individuals, and there is no blame other than the person who decided to shoot them. So, to whoever was driving that van, I certainly hope that you meet an even worse end and that you rot in hell. 32-year-old Joseph Marasco was shot and killed on May 26, 2020 by a man named Matthew Gerwitz. As the story goes, Marasco and his friends decided to take an innocent night trip to 7-Eleven, supposedly to get snacks. And while the offer to drive was there, Marasco said, "Hey, you guys drive. I want to walk and play Pokemon Go. I'll meet you at the gas station." Which is a great way that Pokemon Go players were encouraged to partake in physical activity. Unfortunately, this embracing of physical activity for Marasco led to his unfortunate and untimely death. Apparently, he just ended up on the wrong sidewalk at the wrong time. He passed in front of Matthew Gerwitz's apartment, not on his property, but on the sidewalk in front of his property. And apparently, Gerwitz saw this as a threat of some kind, and they got into a little argument. I tried looking for the details of this argument, but no news article that I read actually gave the details. So if I could speculate, I'd probably say that Gerwitz just didn't want someone on his property, even though, as far as I'm concerned, Marasco was not on his property. But anyways, Gerwitz did shoot and kill him. And even more, when police came to the scene, he opened fired at the police, sending one of the police officers to the hospital, and that police officer is now no longer on the force because he's dealing so much so with post-traumatic stress disorder, which is really just an unfortunate consequence to this whole thing. Police officers, I believe, found 3 illegal weapons in Gerwitz's home. I was about to say Marasco's home. In Gerwitz's home. It's pretty clear from the story that Gerwitz, if he didn't do something bad then and wasn't caught then, he could have done something much worse in the future, because he also attempted to flee the scene, attempting to injure cops on his way. He was pretty intent on being a villain, and again, if he hadn't been caught then, who knows what he could have done in the future. But unfortunately, Marasco did succumb to his injuries in the hospital, and he did pass from this. But there is a shred of good news in all of this. Matthew Gerwitz was charged with 1 count of second-degree murder, 6 counts of first-degree attempted murder, 2 counts of second-degree criminal possession of a weapon, and 3 counts of third-degree criminal possession of a weapon. Fortunately, he was found guilty of all of these charges, and he was sentenced to 65 years to life in prison, which is basically the rest of his life, which is what he deserves, in my opinion. What's even worse is that he was offered the ability to make a brief statement because, obviously you have the right to make your own statement, to shed light on your own side of the story in a court of law. And all he says was, basically that I'm sorry this happened. And that is it. No sign of remorse or anything.
Basically that I'm sorry this happened.
Our next victim's story isn't as complex as the ones previous, but it's nonetheless tragic and ultimately sad and unfortunate because a 9-year-old child was killed in a vehicle accident that resulted from negligent Pokemon Go playing. The child's name was Kaita Noritake, and his assailant in this case was Nobusuke Kawai. Like I said, this is a plain cut case. There's not much else to add other than the fact that Nobusuke Kawai was only sentenced to 3 years in prison, and while I believe that isn't enough time for this child killer, I believe that Japan's justice system overall isn't as severe as America's is and a lot of other countries are. And they also didn't charge him with vehicular manslaughter, which is what it should have been. He was just charged for reckless driving, which are 2 completely different charges in terms of severity. And I think proper justice was not served here. Now, this next case is not related to Pokemon Go. In fact, this comes from Pokemon's first wave of popularity in 1999 and 2000. Indeed, Burger King is at the root of these next couple of deaths when their $22 million promotion of the first Pokemon movie ended up in 2 children, and when I say children, I mean babies, suffocating to death. For this $22 million promotion, Burger King designed and released 57 different Pokemon toys, different Pokemon figures, I should clarify. And these Pokemon figures all resided inside of a small plastic Pokeball. The size of this Pokeball was around 2.75 to 3 inches, and actually, as a demonstration or representation, I have something like that here. Now, I was not alive when this promotion happened, so this is not from that time. It's not from that time in my life because I didn't exist, but I did buy this several years ago because I collect Pokemon memorabilia, and this actually is from 1999. It was not a part of the Burger King promotion. This is completely separate, but it does highly resemble what was being given out at Burger King. This is the approximate size of the ball. I think it's actually the same exact size, and inside, if you can see, there's a little Squirtle in there, and that's what the toy would have looked like. The first victim of this Burger King promotion was a 13-month-old girl in Sonora, California, who on December 11th, 1999, suffocated on the container, and she was found deceased in her playpen with half of the ball covering her nose and mouth. Now, the Burger King toy was blamed for the death, but apparently Burger King, in some wild act or behavior, I don't even know what to call it, decided not to recall the toy until the autopsy revealed that the toy did in fact cause the death, because according to them, they did not want to end a promotion if there was no issue with it. So, had they recalled the toy sooner rather than later and put warnings out sooner rather than later, then perhaps the second child's death that happens from all of this hoopla could have been avoided. But to explain further exactly how the suffocation deaths happened, well, it's really rather simple. The Pokeball, half of the Pokeball, I mean, is the perfect size to suction onto someone's face such that it covers the nose and the mouth. And if a baby were to do this, it would create a vacuum on their face, and suction force can be pretty strong, and a baby more often than not is unable to remove that. And actually, one of the cases here, on December 23rd, an 18-month-old Kansas girl reportedly got half the ball stuck on her nose and mouth, but her father managed to remove it before she was injured. In this case, an adult had to remove it from her face because she likely wasn't strong enough to remove the suction or just get rid of the suction force on the Pokeball. So, unfortunately, Burger King took way too long to actually initiate the recall, and this has often been criticized. Eventually, Burger King does initiate the recall, releasing ads such as this.
Burger King and the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission want you to know about the voluntary recall of this Pokemon Pokeball. The ball may pose a suffocation hazard to children under 3. Throw the ball away or return it to Burger King. The safety of your child is of the utmost importance to us.
And also promoting that if you bring the Pokeballs back, the kids could keep the toys inside. Those were not choking hazards. The actual ball itself was. So if you returned the 2 halves of the ball and also the keychain that came with it, you would receive a free order of small fries, which to me is a pretty lackluster incentive to begin with, but I guess that's fine. Unfortunately, shortly following this recall, another suffocation did happen in Indiana. On January 25th, when a 4-month-old boy in Indianapolis, Indiana, suffocated, half of a Pokemon ball that was in his crib became stuck on his face. It's legitimately the same thing that happened to the previous victim, and Burger King, unfortunately, was just too slow. So at this point, even though the recall had been initiated, it perhaps hadn't reached its zenith, I suppose you could say, and it did end up taking another incredibly young child's life. And what's even sadder to me is that considering when these events are happening, so here, January 25th of the year 2000, these kids would be as old as me, or, well, actually a year or two older than me. And that just is sad. It really hurts to think about that. It's really painful, and I can't even imagine what the parents would be going through with that. But overall, Burger King was certainly not applauded for their slow initiation of the recall, and it did take 2 adolescent lives. Now, before I end this video, I did in fact get this Pokemon toy just to show you that these are the same exact balls, and if you see, or the same exact balls that would have been on the Burger King promotion, I should clarify. But as you can see, they do put a choking hazard. I don't think my camera is going to focus on that, but they do put a choking hazard up here. Small parts, not for children under 3 years old, which is exactly what everything should be saying. Even the Pokeball I showed you before, this one does not have a choking hazard. It says for ages 3 and up, but it still doesn't have the actual choking hazard. So progress has been made on that front. So hopefully anything like this is unlikely to happen, or maybe overall improbable, but I guess only time will tell on that front. This just goes to show that even something like Pokemon does have a bit of a dark side, but none of these, again, are directly related to Pokemon. A lot of this are just people being terrible or people being negligent, and that can overall lead to bad things, especially when you're a big corporation. But overall, I am still an avid Pokemon lover, and I hope you are too. And I also hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, you should consider liking and subbing, because it does support me a great deal, and I would absolutely appreciate it. But that being said, that's all I have for you for today. So until next time, Pterodactyl out.